The global market for almost everything depends upon the relationship between 2 to 3 major superpowers in the world, and since the last decade, these relationships aren't going well. The global economic landscape shifted dramatically in the late 2010s when tensions between the United States and China, which were not very direct up until that point, suddenly shifted to a full-scale trade war. The situation that was already a bit complicated changed much more drastically when Donald Trump became the 45th US president in 2017, and world quickly got to know that Trump isn't much aligned towards China. And it was pretty evident from his policies too. Well, fast forward to 2024 and Trump is back in the White House for the second time with his same type of policies and tariffs, but this time things have become more interesting with the entry of Mexico in the picture. So, what is Mexico's role in this trade war between America and China, and how will it affect today's global market? The US-China trade war. Before anything else, it's important to actually discuss the trade war that started all of this. So, in 2018, the United States, under President Donald Trump, launched a trade war with China, marking one of the most significant shifts in modern international trade. The thing that actually became the reason for this war was the US's long-standing concerns about China's trade practices. Trump's administration accused China of unfair trading practices that allegedly harmed American businesses and jobs. The war began with tariffs on Chinese goods worth billions of dollars. By 2018, the US government's tariffs on Chinese goods reached $250 billion, ranging from electronics to industrial equipment. China, as a reply, implemented tariffs on US products like soybeans, automobiles, and agricultural products. With increasing tariffs, the stakes for both nations as well as global trade increased. Now, according to experts, there are multiple reasons behind Trump going hard on these tariffs. The US government wanted to renegotiate trade terms with China that would offer more protection to American businesses, specifically in sectors like manufacturing and technology. Because of this step of the US government, many industries across both countries got affected. American consumers faced higher prices on a wide range of products, and Chinese manufacturers experienced a slowdown in exports. In response to US tariffs, China replied with its own tariffs on American goods, which hurt several US industries, including agriculture, manufacturing, and even aerospace. All of this became pretty obvious for a normal consumer like you and me when suddenly prices of almost everything skyrocketed. The global supply chain and Mexico's role. In any sort of trade, one of the most essential factors is the supply chain. Over the last several decades, the increasing cooperation between economies across the globe has allowed companies to manufacture products in multiple countries, which resulted in decreased costs and streamlined production processes. While everything was going smooth, the US-China trade war suddenly disturbed this whole smooth process. And suddenly, every company started to look for ways to avoid the growing tariffs because of this war. Now, this is where America's neighbor Mexico enters the picture. So Mexico has long been a crucial player in the global supply chain, thanks to its closeness to the United States and its participation in several free trade agreements. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, signed in 1994, created a trade network between the US, Canada, and Mexico. This agreement allowed companies to take advantage of lower labor costs in Mexico, while benefiting from tariff-free access to the US market. Mexico's location has turned it into a global manufacturing hub. By 2018, Mexico was the US's second-largest trading partner, with trade between the two countries totaling approximately $677 billion, with major sectors being automotive, electronics, and agriculture industries. Now in this war, the global business society had to rethink their whole decades-old strategy. Because of the tariffs, many companies began to rethink their reliance on China. The tariffs imposed on Chinese goods increased production costs for many US-based manufacturers. As a result, companies started moving production from China to Mexico, which already had an established manufacturing base with cheap labor and tariff-free access to the US market through NAFTA. The loophole: China's Mexico strategy. This newer strategy of using Mexico as an alternative pathway quickly became popular, and China's use of Mexico as a trade loophole became even more important as the tariffs on Chinese goods continued to rise. Chinese companies who at this point were facing tariffs of up to 25% began to set up production facilities in Mexico or partner with Mexican manufacturers. This allowed them to produce goods in Mexico, label them as Made in Mexico, and then export them to the United States without the additional tariff burden. In many cases, Chinese companies did not even have to build new factories or production units in Mexico. Instead, they worked with existing Mexican manufacturers who could produce goods using Chinese components. These goods would then be sold as Mexican-made products, thus circumventing U.S. tariffs on Chinese imports. The benefits for China. Now, obviously, the secret weapon of using Mexico benefited China big time. By shifting production to Mexico, Chinese manufacturers were able to avoid the 25% tariffs imposed on Chinese goods, effectively lowering their cost when exporting to the U.S. This allowed Chinese manufacturers to keep their prices competitive in the U.S. market, even in the face of the trade war. Similarly, with the help of Mexican manufacturers, many were able to quickly adapt to the new demand for goods. China became able to cater to a bigger market at a lower cost. The impact on the U.S. On the other hand, while Mexico became a critical ally for China in avoiding U.S. tariffs, the American economy also felt the effects of this new trade dynamic. The initial goal of the U.S. tariffs was to pressure China into changing its trade practices, but the indirect consequence was that Chinese manufacturers adapted by shifting production to Mexico. This resulted in some significant outcomes, like the U.S. government losing out on tariff revenue from Chinese goods, as many of these goods were now being produced in Mexico and circumventing U.S. tariffs. Similarly, the U.S. job market also got affected, and many jobs in sectors like electronics and apparel were lost to countries like Mexico, where labor costs were lower. American companies in this whole scenario were forced to find ways to compete with goods produced in Mexico. Companies that had previously depended on cheap Chinese imports faced increased pressure to either relocate their production or absorb the costs of higher tariffs on Chinese products. The future of the Mexico loophole. Now, when we look ahead, the question that first comes to mind is, for how long can Mexico continue to serve as China's loophole to avoid U.S. tariffs? We know now that Mexico and China have developed a strong trade relationship over the years. As of 2021, China was Mexico's second-largest trade partner, with bilateral trade exceeding $100 billion. Up until this point, Mexico has shown no signs of dramatically altering this relationship. Similarly, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which replaced NAFTA, still provides preferential trade terms for goods produced in Mexico. This agreement could continue to make Mexico an attractive option for Chinese manufacturers seeking to bypass U.S. tariffs. However, there are risks to this strategy. Noon knows what the U.S. will do to rectify the situation, and with Trump in the White House, you never really know what he'll do. The U.S. could eventually implement stricter rules of origin under the USMCA to limit the use of Mexico as a conduit for Chinese products. Additionally, as the geopolitical rivalry between the U.S. and China continues to increase, both the U.S. and Mexico may face increasing pressure to adopt policies that could limit these trade loopholes. What will be the future of U.S.-Mexico relations? We know that Trump has always been a bit conflicted when it comes to Mexico, and his government won't tolerate this loophole for much longer. History-speaking Mexico and the United States share a complex and interdependent economic relationship. The U.S. is Mexico's largest trading partner, and Mexico is the third largest trading partner for the U.S. In 2020, the total value of trade between the two nations was over $600 billion. And this trade relationship is built on key industries such as automotive manufacturing, agriculture, electronics, and energy. While the trade war between the US and China has complicated matters for both countries, it has also made it obvious that letting go of Mexico as a potential market or a manufacturing hub isn't that easy. The flow of goods between the US and Mexico continues to be essential to both economies today and in the future. It's undeniable that the US-China trade war has reshaped global trade dynamics in ways that few could have predicted. Mexico, which was once considered a developing country with pretty low stakes, has suddenly become a big player in the global supply chain. This phenomenon has allowed China to adapt to the trade war's pressures. While Mexico has solidified its position as a manufacturing powerhouse, but US, on the other hand, has lost its footing a bit in this competition because of this loophole. However, the future of this Mexico loophole remains uncertain. While China and Mexico continue to strengthen their trade ties, the US may decide to tighten regulations to prevent further avoidance of tariffs. Regardless of the future, Mexico's role in the global supply chain will continue to be important for the global economy.